In Israel, corruption reigned under King Ahab and the ruthless Queen Jezebel, who controlled the kingdom with dark power and manipulation. Well, welcome, dear friends. Today we delved deep into the fascinating story of Jehu, one of the most intriguing kings of Israel. In the second half, we will delve into the more mysterious philosophic characters. From his dramatic rise to power to his fierce actions against idolatry, Jehu's mission was clear: destroy Ahab's bloodline and end Jezebel's terror. Jehu's story was packed with excitement and lessons. For those who enjoy history and biblical tales, we encourage you to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell for more content. So, who exactly was Jehu in the land of Israel during a time when kings ruled over God's people? A man named Jehu lived as a commander in the army. He was strong, brave, and loyal to Israel. But things in Israel were not right. The kings had turned away from God, worshipping idols and leading the people astray. The wickedness of Ahab and Jezebel, the rulers of Israel, had greatly angered the Lord. One day, as Jehu was meeting with other commanders, a messenger from the prophet Elisha arrived. This messenger, a young prophet, quickly took Jehu aside and poured oil on his head, saying, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anoint you king over the Lord's people, Israel. You are to destroy the house of Ahab, and the Lord will avenge the blood of his servants, the prophets." With that, the prophet left, and Jehu stood in awe of the calling he had just received. Jehu's fellow commanders, seeing him anointed, asked him what had happened. At first, Jehu tried to brush it off, but they insisted. Finally, he said, "The prophet anointed me king of Israel. The prophet himself has given this to me." The commanders immediately proclaimed him king. And Jehu knew his life was about to change. His heart burned with a sense of purpose. He was now God's chosen instrument of justice, and his mission was clear: to bring an end to the house of Ahab. As soon as Jehu was declared king, he wasted no time. He gathered his chariot and men, and they rode swiftly toward Jezreel, where King Joram, the son of Ahab, was recovering from battle wounds. Jehu knew that Joram had continued the evil ways of his father Ahab and his mother Jezebel. It was time for justice. Meanwhile, in Jezreel, Joram had no idea what was coming. As Jehu approached, a watchman spotted the dust of Jehu's chariot far off and reported it to the king. Joram sent out a rider to ask if Jehu was coming in peace. But Jehu replied, "What do you know of peace? Fall in behind me." The rider obeyed and joined Jehu's procession. Another rider was sent, and again Jehu gave the same response. The watchman then recognized Jehu's furious driving. "It looks like the driving of Jehu, son of Nimshi. He drives like a madman," he reported. Joram became uneasy. Sensing danger, he ordered his chariot to be prepared and rode out to meet Jehu. As the two kings met, Joram asked, "Have you come in peace, Jehu?" But Jehu answered with fury, "How can there be peace as long as your mother Jezebel practices her witchcraft and idolatry?" Fear struck Joram, and he turned his chariot to flee, but Jehu quickly drew his bow and shot Joram through the heart. The king fell, and Jehu's reign of justice had begun. But Jehu's work was far from over. The most dangerous enemy still remained. Queen Jezebel, the infamous woman who had led Israel into idolatry and had the blood of God's prophets on her hands. Jehu knew she was his next target. Jehu rode into Jezreel, determined to finish what God had anointed him to do. He saw a battle. Queen Jezebel, hearing of Jehu's approach, sighed, prepared herself for the encounter. She painted her eyes, arranged her hair, and stood at the window of her palace, ready to confront him. As Jehu entered the city, Jezebel called out from the window, "Is it peace, you Zimri, murderer of your master?" She taunted Jehu. But Jehu was unmoved. He looked up and saw her standing in the window. "Who is on my side?" "Who?" Jehu shouted. 2 or 3 eunuchs, standing near Jezebel, looked down at Jehu. Without hesitation, Jehu commanded, "Throw her down." And so they did. Jezebel fell from the window, and her blood splattered on the walls and horses. Afterward, Jehu went inside to eat and drink, but he remembered the prophecy that Elijah had spoken concerning Jezebel. He sent men to bury her, for she was a king's daughter. But when they went to bury her, they found only her skull, feet, and hands. The dogs had devoured her, just as the word of the Lord had foretold. With Jezebel's death, Jehu had fulfilled part of God's command, but his mission was far from complete. Jehu sent a letter to the leaders of Samaria, the city where Ahab's sons lived. In the letter he challenged them, saying, "You have your master's sons, chariots, horses, and a fortified city. Choose the best and fittest of Ahab's sons to be king and fight for your master's house." But the leaders were terrified. They had already heard of how Jehu had overthrown 2 kings in one day. They replied to Jehu, "We are your servants, and we will do all that you ask. We will not make anyone king." Jehu, sensing their fear, sent another message. "If you are on my side and will obey me, take the heads of Ahab's sons and bring them to me here in Jezreel. Bring them to me here in Jezreel." By this time tomorrow the leaders complied, beheading all 70 sons of Ahab. They placed the heads in baskets and sent them to Jehu in Jezreel. When the heads arrived, Jehu ordered them to be piled at the city gate for all to see. He addressed the people of Jezreel, saying, "Know this not, the word the Lord has spoken against the house of Ahab will fail." Jehu's purge was thorough. Phyllis, ensuring that no allies of Ahab or Ahaziah would rise to oppose him. As Jehu was making his way to Samaria, he encountered a man named Jehonadab, son of Rechab. Jehonadab called Hephtamas, and his pilot named Soph. Jehonadab was a righteous man who had long opposed the idolatry and wickedness that had flourished under Ahab's rule. Jehu said to Jehonadab, "Come with me and see my zeal for the Lord." Jehonadab witnessed firsthand Jehu's determination to rid Israel of Baal worship and idolatry. Jehu wanted to show that his actions were not just for personal gain or power, but out of devotion to the Lord's command. Jehonadab's presence symbolized the support of the righteous in Israel, affirming that Jehu was on the side of justice. While Ahab's family had been wiped out, there was still one more stronghold of evil in Israel, the worship of Baal. Queen Jezebel had made Baal worship widespread during her reign, and its influence remained strong even after her death. Jehu knew that to fully restore Israel to the Lord, he had to eliminate Baal worship from the land. Jehu devised a cunning plan to gather all the followers and priests of Baal in one place, doing the divine work left upon the balustrade. He proclaimed a great sacrifice in honor of Baal and sent messengers throughout Israel, inviting all Baal worshippers to attend. From Baal, he declared, "Ahab served Baal a little, but Jehu will serve him much more." The people were deceived, thinking that Jehu had turned to Baal worship. When the day of the sacrifice arrived, the temple of Baal in Samaria was packed with worshippers. Jehu ordered the priests of Baal to wear special robes so that they could be easily identified. As the people gathered, Jehu stationed 80 of his men outside the temple, commanding them, "If any of you let one of these men escape, your life will be taken in his place." Jehu entered the temple, and once all the worshippers were inside, he gave the signal. His men stormed the temple, slaughtering every priest of Baal. No one escaped. The temple was torn down, and the sacred stone of Baal was destroyed. Jehu turned the temple into a latrine, a symbol of the utter destruction of Baal worship in Israel. With the house of Ahab destroyed, Jezebel gone, and Baal worship eliminated, Jehu had fulfilled the mission God had given him. He had cleansed Israel of its most corrupt influences. For his obedience, the Lord promised Jehu that his descendants would sit on the throne of Israel for 4 generations. As the years passed, King Jehu's initial fervor began to wane. "Bestow," I said, King Jehu. He had done what the Lord commanded by obliterating Baal worship from the land, but the shadows of complacency crept into his heart. Though he had rid Israel of Ahab's wicked line, he could not rid himself of the consequences of his own decisions. Jehu had allowed the golden calves in Bethel and Dan to remain. Great walls in the morning, in the halls of the palace, whispers of discontent grew louder. The nobles began to murmur about the king's decisions, questioning his authority and the wisdom of his rule. Jehu, once the fierce warrior who had charged into battle without hesitation, now found himself besieged, not by physical enemies, but by the very people he had fought to protect. Each day he felt the weight of their expectations, pressing down on him. Despite his worries, Jehu clung to the memories of his earlier victories. He recalled the exhilaration of riding into Jezreel to confront King Joram, the thrill of executing justice against Jezebel, and the overwhelming sense of purpose he had felt when he had destroyed the prophets of Baal. But as time went on, those memories began to fade, overshadowed by the mistakes he had made in his later years. The tension in the kingdom grew palpable. Jehu often retreated to his chamber, where he would gaze out over the city of Samaria, feeling the burden of kingship weigh heavily on his shoulders. He had accomplished much, yet the hollow feeling inside him grew. He knew deep down that he had strayed from the path God had set for him. The divine favor he had once felt began to slip away like sand through his fingers as his health began to decline. End of poem. Jehu sought the counsel of his advisers, yet rather than speaking the truth he needed to hear, they told him what he wanted to know, feeding his pride. They praised his past victories, yet failed to remind him of the responsibilities that came with the throne. End quote. Jehu's heart, and he shut himself off from the warnings of the prophets who sought to bring him back to righteousness. Ha 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 ha. He laughed, and waited for a pause in the babbling. One fateful night, Jehu fell ill. A deep, dark night. Consuming weakness took hold of him, and the once mighty king could no longer rise from his bed. The palace was filled with a sense of foreboding as nobles and soldiers gathered, whispering of the king's condition. Though they had once celebrated his bravery, now they feared the future of Israel without their fearless leader. In his final moments, Jehu reflected on his reign, the battles he had fought and the idols he had destroyed. Pikon Kamla had Bram Daleat and Daliak Chak Neighbor, but with each thought the weight of his compromises pressed down harder. As he lay on his deathbed, he could hear the faint sounds of the city beyond his window, children playing, merchants shouting, and the rhythm of life. Continuing unaware of the storm brewing in the hearts of the people, feeling the presence of his forebears, the presence of the Decoli, Jehu whispered a prayer seeking mercy for his missteps. His heart longed for redemption, yet he knew that the consequences of his choices would reverberate long after his passing with the kingdom he had fought to protect, now unraveled in his absence as darkness descended upon the land. Jehu breathed his last breath. His loyal subjects mourned their king, but there were no grand celebrations or parades for the man who had brought both triumph and turmoil into Befront's life on March the 10th. But destiny had other ideas. The people knew that while he had been a valiant warrior, his reign was marred by the shadows of his decisions. When the time came for Jehu to be laid to rest, the city gathered to pay their respects. On the brighter day of the year, Jehu was buried. They buried him in the royal tombs of Samaria, but the legacy he left behind was one of both glory and warning. His son Jehoahaz would ascend to the throne, but the lessons of Jehu's reign would echo through the ages, reminding future kings of the delicate balance between strength and power, and humility between zeal and faithfulness. So this is one of his... Jehu was remembered as a king who acted with great zeal for the Lord. He rose tender-footed in creation, and employed the sheerest hard work to build on his magical predicament. His boldness in carrying out God's judgment set him apart from other kings. However, Jehu did not fully turn the hearts of the people back to the Lord. Though he destroyed Baal worship, the golden calves that had been set up in Bethel and Dan remained, and Israel continued to struggle with idolatry.